Valve guides are one thing that are often either overlooked or just set aside for folks who are doing engine maintenance. And that's usually because they're considered to be really hard to remove. The Willis manual suggests that the guides have to be driven down through the block, and that of course requires taking out the cam. We're going to show you here how to easily remove the guides while the block is still in the vehicle and while the cam is still in the block. We can draw them out through the top. Tight-fitting valve guides are important to a smooth and efficient engine. An exhaust valve that is loose in its guide enables exhaust gases to leak around the side of the guide and go down into the crankcase. A loose-fitting intake valve allows gases that are in the crankcase to be drawn up through the valve guides and enter the combustion chamber, where they'll either cause a poor mixture or pre-ignition. To protect the block, use a piece of masonite over the block itself, and then a piece of 1/2" or 3/4 inch steel bar to distribute the load over the block. This is a 3/8 inch fine threaded rod with a long nut on one end and grade 8 nut on the bottom. Of course, the rod goes through the valve guide, and then I'm going to tighten up the nut on the bottom to the valve guide itself. Now I'm placing an open-end wrench on the bottom nut, and here I'm going to use this adjustable wrench on the top to tighten the nut and pull up on the rod. You could, of course, use a shorter threaded rod, and a socket wrench would work well until you hear a click. And there we go. Now we're loose enough to draw this valve guide up. It'll take about 60 or 70 foot-pounds of torque to pull that guide loose, but it will come free. Once it comes up high enough, remove the bar and put some kind of a large spacer on top of the block to have more room to pull the guide up. With the load distributing bar back in place, continue to tighten the nut. The guide should come up more easily as it gets closer to the top until you can finally just pull it out of the block, just like that. To drive in the new guides, I made a steel drift with a 1-inch depth marking for the exhaust valve and a 1 5/16 depth marking for the intake valve. This is the distance from the block down to the guide. Now insert the guide and the drift. Make sure the drift is vertical and begin to drive them back in. Make sure the valve guide's bore in the block is clean before reinserting the valve guide. Doing valve guide number 8 is difficult because of the overhang in the engine compartment, but if you can at least do valves 1 through 7, it's beneficial for a smooth running engine. Here I'm checking the depth of the valve guides to ensure that the exhaust valve is down 1 inch and the intake valve is down 1 5/16. The valve springs are dual rate springs. Some of the coils are further apart than others. So when you put them in, make sure that the coils that are closer together are towards the top of the block. Well, there you have it. And I think you'll see that replacing the guides for valves 1 through 7 is a fairly easy project with the block still in the vehicle. Walks has a full complement of intake valves, exhaust valves, intake guides and exhaust guides, and the springs, which are the same for all, and the keepers, which are the same for all for your Jeep engines. So by all means, don't put it aside. It's a really important component if you want to get that engine to run smooth.